In this video, the goal is to teach you some skills that you can use to repair basic cables for audio and video at your home church. To do most cable repair, especially for audio, you are required to do what is known as soldering. Soldering connectors to the end of a cable is the best way to ensure that it actually stays connected. So with that, let's get started with some soldering. But before we do, I want to take a little bit of time to talk about some safety. Soldering irons can burn at 650 degrees or hotter. And believe me when I tell you, that will leave a mark if you get hit by molten solder or happen to tap the metal end of the soldering iron in just the wrong place. I speak from experience. So please, take the safety precautions that you need to take, including wearing eye protection to avoid getting hot molten solder anywhere near your eyes. So to begin the process of soldering, we need to first turn on our soldering iron. And once I do that, the digital display is going to light up and it will very quickly come up to temperature. So while we're waiting for it to come up to temperature, there's one other thing that I need to do, and that is I need to take this sponge here and it needs to be wet so that I can clean the soldering iron. So to begin the cable making process, I'm going to demonstrate how to make what they call an XLR or microphone cable. A microphone cable is a 3-conductor cable. And when I say 3-conductor, I mean there are 3 wires in the cord. So what we'll be using is 22 gauge microphone wire, or also known as 22-3. So I'm just going to take a length of the 22-3, and you would obviously roll this out however long you want the cable to be. For purposes of this, I'm not going to make a very long cable. We'll just cut that off of there. And then we have to put some parts together before we can solder. There are 2 ends to any cable. There are male and female. So this is the male end of an XLR cable. And there are 4 parts in this bag. You have the connector itself, which doesn't really look like much. You have the boot of the cable, which is a part that you will see. You have also a strain relief, which kind of tends to get stuck sometimes inside the metal barrel, and just take a screwdriver and take him out. And then you have the metal barrel or metal housing for the connector. So to begin, you simply take the narrow end of the boot, which is this piece here, and slide onto the cable so that the cable comes out through the wide end. Then you do the same thing with the strain relief. The narrow end of the strain relief goes into the wide end of the boot. And so now we can actually start the process of soldering. To do so, we're going to strip the outer jacket of the cable. Like so. Okay, so once you strip the outer jacket of your cable, you're going to see a bare copper strand, or a series of bare copper strands, are the very next thing that you'll run into. And that is an important piece because that is what comprises your shield or your drain for your cable. So what you want to do with those is gather as many of those as you can and then twist them together to make a nice braid that you can work with. Now, One of the annoying things about soldering cable is usually there's some kind of an inner jacket, in this case it's a bunch of strings, that you have to deal with that really are of no use. So, because they are of no use, I'm simply going to take a pair of scissors and cut them off. So once you've done that, this is what you should end up with. You should have 3 wires here. Now, just as a note from when I stripped this, these are a little long. So I'm going to take a small pair of snips, and I am actually going to deliberately shorten these up a little bit. Okay, so now we have to strip a little bit of the jacket on, inner jacket on these 2 wires. The key here is to strip what we call short tails. That is to say, you don't want to expose a lot of the copper wire here. The reason you want to avoid that is otherwise you could end up with what they call a dead short if your wires touch on your finished cable. So once I've done that, this is what it should end up looking something like when it's done. So with that stage done, now we have to do what is called tinning the wire. And what is meant by tinning the wire is simply coating each of the copper ends in a little bit of solder. To do that, I use a rather large bench vise and the soldering iron. I'm going to do one thing because I preached about safety. I figure I should probably follow and practice what I preach. So I'm going to put on an eye shield to protect my eyes from any flying molten solder or other unpleasant things that might come off of these wires. So with that in place, now I'm going to tin these 3 wires. Let's see there. So now, as you can see, what we have here is 3 copper wires that are tinned in solder. And that's exactly what we want. Now, we have to prepare our connector to receive our wires. And that again involves some solder. And just like tinning the wires, we're essentially going to tin the 3 cups for the pins. Now that we've put solder in our cups, and I know some people are thinking, well, how are you going to get the wire in there now that you've put solder in the cups? It's actually very simple. The thing to remember with these connectors is that the pins are numbered. On a male connector like we have here, the closest pin to you is pin 1, the furthest pin from you is pin 2, and the bottom pin is pin 3. Now you can use either of the two colored wires for pins 2 and 3, but once you decide which color you're going to use on one end, be sure you use the same color on the other end. As I like to say, this is not a mix and match game. So generally when I do this, I like to start with pin 3. And to do that, I simply am going to bring the soldering iron down and reheat the pin 3 point so that the wire will slide in there. And it lets up and cools and it stays in place. Process is the same for pins 1 and 2. You'll likely hear it make a little bit of noise, kind of a squeaking noise as you're putting things together. Don't worry about that. That doesn't mean you're doing anything wrong. That's actually a good sign. So the next step is to let this cool just for a moment. And now we need to carefully arrange our wires so we can put the rest of the connector together. This is what you kind of want to end up with when you're done. So now that this has cooled off enough to the point where we can handle it, we need to put the rest of this together. To do so with these Neutrik brand connectors, you simply slide you simply want to hold the metal barrel so that this open notch is on the top, and then hold your connector right side up, and it's going to slide in from the back, usually fairly easily. On occasion, you might have to take something to persuade it a little bit. Then you're going to take your small strain relief from your first step, and there's a small notch that you're going to slide that in. And you're going to take your threaded boot here and thread onto the back of the cable. And with that put together, you have a male XLR microphone connection on the end of your cord. So now that we've done a male connector, we have to do its opposite female. So we're going to take another connector that looks very similar but is a little bit different, and we're going to make the other end of our cable. So again, we're going to push our boot onto our cable, and here is our actual female connector, and you can tell the difference in it has the slots instead of the pins. So I'm going to turn him upside down on this side of my work surface here. And one thing to note when you are doing the female ends is that pins 1 and 2 are reversed. The process for putting on a female versus a male connector is largely the same, with the exception of the pin reversal, which I will demonstrate when we get to that step. So I've gone through the same process that was demonstrated earlier of tinning the wires, and I've also gone through the process of tinning the cups for the XLR. Now, as I mentioned earlier, when you do the female end of the connector, pins 1 and 2 are reversed from what your male connector was. So pin 1 is now here. and pin 2 is here. And pin 3 stays in the same position the whole time. So to begin the process of soldering these together, again, I'm going to start with pin 3 and get him out of the way. We'll simply reheat that connector, and once the wire end is in there, pull the soldering iron back, and it will cool to the point where it'll be stuck almost instantly. And you repeat the same process here. And last but not least, you're going to do your final wire here. And there you have it. Let him cool for a few minutes, and you can put the rest of it together. So, one thing to note when you're putting the female end together is this small little spring tab on the top of the connector, and that goes upright and on the top of the barrel, and when you slide that in, that will push the little outer tab up so that you can use it as a release. And as I mentioned on both ends, sometimes it helps to take a small screwdriver or other pointed implement to make sure the connector is fully seated. Once that's in, we'll bring our strain relief forward and slide this in, like so. And then we'll take our lovely threaded boot here, and sometimes these things can be really temperamental. There we go. And there you have a female end. Now, as you can see, we have a completed cable, and obviously it's very short, but this is for demonstration purposes only. You would obviously make the cord whatever length you need it to be. But one important thing to always do after you make a cord is to test it, and there are a variety of different testers out there. I just happen to have what they call the Cable Scanner 1000. To test the cable, you want to put your male XLR end in the female jack on the right-hand side of the tester, like so. And then you're going to come over and conversely put your female connector in like so. And then when we're going to flip on the switch, we're going to flip it to cable test. And then you're going to look at your lights, and if you see two lights in positions 1, 2, and 3, and they go up and down by pairs, then you know your cable is good. So for this session, we've demonstrated how to make a standard microphone cable, and the procedure applies in a very similar way if you have a microphone cable that you've determined is not working. Oftentimes you can open them up and determine if there's a short or a loose wire, and you can simply fix that, and you don't even have to start from scratch. I hope this helps you understand the art and technique that it takes to make and repair cables. Thank you for joining us.